We have MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter and host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, outside that hearing room. Our Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend, Jackie Alemany, is at the White House. And here in New York, financial journalist and author of The Message of the Markets on Substack, Ron Insana, and University of Michigan economics professor Justin Wolfer is joining us as well. Ali, this is not exactly a slam dunk confirmation for one glaring reason, and that is the DOJ's investigation of the current Fed chair. You have Republican Senator Thom Tillis saying he's going to block Warsh's nomination or anyone else's at the Fed until that probe is resolved. So can Tillis essentially derail this whole process?
Yes. And in fact, he is the most interesting man in that hearing. And I just talked to him as he was walking into it. And I said, have you heard from the White House about the hold that you are vowing to place on any future nominee, but especially Kevin Warsh for Fed chair? He says, yeah, I hear from the White House all the time. And I said, any sign that they're budging to try to get you to yes, which is basically just them saying, OK, we should take the DOJ investigation of Powell, which, by the way, most people on the Senate Banking Committee agree is baseless. It's based on testimony he gave them over a year ago now about the renovations into the Fed. No one on the Senate Banking Committee thinks that there's any kind of perjury charge there. And yet Tillis says, what I can tell you is there's no sign I'm budging. And I think notably so, when I listened to the president on CNBC this morning, our sister network, it was fascinating to hear him be given off-ramps that could allow this nominee to go forward in the Senate. And the president just repeatedly said he was going to double down. He was not going to take himself out of a circumstance that's frankly of his and his DOJ's own making. And so this should be a nomination that is really focused on what the economists and economic experts on your panel are focusing on, which is independence of the Fed, impact of taking down interest rates, what it looks like as you're trying to combat inflation. All of those things are the policy piece of this. But as I said on my show this morning, the politics is so heavy in it because for someone like Thom Tillis, he has said, I don't even need to talk to Kevin Warsh. I like him as the nominee. But on principle, if you are investigating a Fed chair, Tillis's concern is that anyone who comes before Congress for an oversight committee hearing of these kinds of natures can have their words twisted into a federal charge or investigation that is actually baseless but meant to pursue political means. And so Tillis is making both a moral and institutional argument here for the Fed, for Congress, and that's going to be what we see play out today. As you see in the room, all the members are likely seated at this point. You see the chairman of the committee, Tim Scott, he'll speak first. The ranking member of the committee, Senator Elizabeth Warren, will speak second, and then you will hear from Warsh himself in an opening statement likely to touch on the independence issue. Unclear that it touches on the Trump-Powell of it all.
And we can see the chairman, Senator Tim Scott, just calling to order this hearing and making a few comments before the opening statements get underway. And we saw Kevin Warsh walk into the room while you were speaking, Ali. He had lots of smiles, gave lots of handshakes before taking his seat, surrounded by all of those photographers. Jackie, as we await the opening statement from Warsh, remember, it was President Trump in his first term who initially elevated Jerome Powell to Fed chair. It's easy to forget that, given just how those two have really locked horns and how the president is now trying to force Powell out. What is the status of the DOJ probe, and what do we know about why Trump wants Warsh specifically?
Yeah, Anna, well, it's always Groundhog Day around here, and that investigation is still ongoing, despite, as Ali pointed out, the president having multiple off-ramps here, especially since U.S. District Judge James Boasberg has now twice ruled to block the subpoenas that were issued by D.C.'s top prosecutor, Jeanine Pirro, essentially saying that the case that has been brought against Jerome Powell is completely pretextual and that the administration has provided zero evidence to prove these charges. But President Trump last week made it extremely clear in an interview that he has no intention of dropping the investigation. He says it's now no longer a criminal inquiry, but rather a probe into incompetence. Let's give it a listen to Trump's interview on CNBC.
We have to find out why a small building cost close to $4 billion. It's not finished, by the way. They have a long way to go. They ripped down the most beautiful ceilings. They'll never build them again. The most beautiful, thick, 1.5 foot thick walls. I can't imagine. I can't imagine that Too Late is taking money on construction. I can't. But it's possible. But we have to find out why is a job that should have cost $25 million costing billions and billions of dollars.
Now, as to why the president wants Kevin Warsh in this role, he is someone who is well regarded. He has a conservative view of the markets. He has genuine expertise. He believes in limited government intervention in the markets. It's unclear, though, which way Warsh could act on the issue that has been most important to the president, which is obviously interest rates. Like Powell, he's actually been hawkish on interest rates in the past. But in November, he issued a little bit of a tone change, writing in an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal that actually the central bank needed to re-examine the dogma that it took when they make the assumption that inflation is caused when the economy grows too much and when workers are paid too much. He wrote essentially that a bloated federal government balance can be redeployed in the form of lower interest rates to support households and small and medium-sized businesses. I am sure he will be asked in a million different ways today which way he would act when it comes to interest rates and whether or not he's going to act in a way that is protective of the central bank's independence or if he's someone who's going to be doing the president's bidding.
And we continue to watch live images right now from this hearing room before the Senate Banking Committee, where Warsh's confirmation is happening in this hearing, where he will face questions from these senators, including the chairman, Tim Scott, who's speaking right now, giving his opening statement. I do want to fact check just briefly what we heard from the president in that clip on CNBC this morning. Some of the numbers that he threw out haven't been verified. He said 4 million or 4 billion. It's more like $2.5 billion for that Fed renovation project. And at this point, even his own prosecutors have admitted in court that there is no evidence of any kind of criminal wrongdoing behind the cost overruns. In fact, the Fed has explained it in pretty direct terms that it's because of the additional money that has cost for labor and materials, some unexpected things they found with asbestos and soil contamination. Those are the reasons they've given for all of that. In the meantime, coming back to the pressure campaign from this president when it comes to interest rates, and it was a social media post last December where President Trump said loud and clear what he wants. Quote, "I want my new Fed chairman to lower interest rates if the market is doing well, not destroy the market for no reason whatsoever." And he went on to say inflation will take care of itself. Justin, is that sound economic policy? And do you think Warsh will maintain the central bank's independence?
Right. So the president's thinking here is the opposite of sound economic thinking. Inflation will take care of itself is the famous last words that occur before every hyperinflation. The real problem with this nomination is the president has said very clearly, I want a yes man. I want a yes man who will implement my low interest rate policy, who will serve my political interests rather than following the data and the best interests of the American people. Normally, I think we should give a lot of deference to a president making a choice like this, but he's effectively out there boasting, I've got my guy who's in my pocket, who's not going to do what Congress asks him to do, but do what I want him to do. That, I think, changes the presumptions here. And I think there's really very important questions about what was said behind closed doors. Who promised what to who in order to get this nomination to come this far? So very, very profound questions. Warsh has said publicly he's in favor of central bank independence, but it appears he's left the president believing that he's there to be his lackey.
Yeah, Warsh has been seriously critical of the Fed recently. CNBC reports in his remarks today, as we await those opening remarks, he'll tell the Senate that the Fed must stay in its lane. Fed independence is placed at greatest risk when it strays into fiscal and social policies where it has neither authority nor expertise. Ron, has the Fed veered from its lane in the past?
I don't know that that's an accurate statement from Kevin Warsh, insofar as we've had a series of extraordinary events. And I was speaking to Kevin Warsh back during the great financial crisis when he was opposed to lowering rates, when the banking system was failing and the economy was heading towards a depression. He did not want the Fed to intervene as aggressively as it did, warning that inflation would be a problem. Now he wants to cut interest rates when inflation is above the Federal Reserve's target, when the economy is still growing. So this is antithetical to everything he said back in 2008. But what's also interesting here is that the Fed's independence is determined by all the members of the Federal Reserve, not just the chairman. And so he's one vote of many. And he's, I think, in a certain sense, as Justin indicated, the real risk here is what was said behind closed doors. Is he going to lower interest rates because the president wants him to? In which case, Federal Reserve independence in an environment like this would be openly questioned. And you could see a reaction in the value of the dollar, the level of interest rates. You could see the bond market spike up because they're worried that he's going to fan the flames of inflation. You know, we're in the midst of a war where oil prices are going up, and that is not helping in any way, shape, or form. So it's hard to kind of parse what he's been saying publicly. And I don't think the Fed, whether during the great financial crisis or even during the pandemic, when a lot was done to stimulate the economy, stepped out of its role in supporting the economy at very critical junctures. This is open to debate. A lot of different economists have different views of what the Fed should do. But I think the Fed, by and large, given the hands it's been dealt over the last many years, has stayed within its lane and done what was best for the economy.